Hi, Wayne Jacob, the Week Nation. I have to take a little bit of objection, I guess, to your comment about the consensus issue. I think that at least striving to seek consensus is kind of a major driver, in my mind anyways, on determining your willingness of your participants to actively be engaged in the process. And I'm wondering if really, because you only had 3 options presented, if maybe it was more, in your opinion, the process of determining the options. Maybe you can comment on that. How were they developed, and how were people involved in presenting and getting consensus, I'm assuming, around those options that eventually went to the panel?
Okay, let me go into that a little bit more. On the North Central Coast, and this was something that was learned from on the Central Coast, the process was the entire regional stakeholder group discussed alternatives and tried to develop alternatives. And that ended up being a bit polarizing in a way. And so on the North Central Coast, what was done is that the regional stakeholder group was divided up into 3 groups that represented, had the same representation as the entire group. Those groups then developed, using all the tools that I've mentioned, they developed at least 2 alternatives. And then they would bring those alternatives back to the entire regional stakeholder group. They would be discussed, they would go to the science team, and then they would come back and redesign. So they call them the gem groups because their nicknames are Lapis and Emerald and whatever. The gem groups were the focus for the development of the initial alternatives. The regional stakeholder group would then meet with the Blue Ribbon Task Force after a review by the Science Advisory Team and present their alternatives. And to your point about consensus, the Blue Ribbon Task Force regularly made it clear to them that they wanted to see more convergence among the alternatives. That what they were looking for was trying to find an alternative that represented the broadest range of interests. So they would talk about consensus, but what they were trying to do was to encourage people to think a little bit more broadly. And indeed, if you look at the 3 alternatives on the North Central Coast, there isn't a whole lot of difference among the alternatives. I mean, there are differences, but oftentimes it's, is it a marine reserve or is it a marine conservation area? So I don't mean to say that there isn't an effort to encourage agreement and consensus, but it's just that it shouldn't be done at the cost of having a fair representation of the interests that are in the room, so that the Fish and Game Commission, which is the ultimate, is the entity that makes those final tough choices of balance, are able to do so.
Thanks. And table 3, I think, has the last question. Was I right? Thank you.
Yes, for Stephanie, Jennifer Carpenter, Hetsick Nation. What was the involvement, if any, of Native Americans in Massachusetts, and what was the budget for that whole initiative?
Great, thanks.
It'll fire up.
Both good questions. To the first, it's a very different cultural, political landscape in New England than it is here. And so the extent of involvement of Native Americans in this formal process is essentially their participation is equivalent to any other stakeholder or interest group. So, for example, when the state went out and initiated those stakeholder interviews that I described, as part of their formal process, they met with a number of tribes, including the Wampanoag, and a typical interest that the Native American groups have in ocean management planning is as fishers, and to make sure that traditional or ceremonial areas are not overrun. So definitely players at the table, but obviously a very different cultural and political landscape than here. To your second question, in Massachusetts, the partnership budget for both developing the partnerships activities and trying to work on the social capital and science integration and supporting the state's formal process, our 3-year budget is approximately $8 million. The state itself, at our insistence, has estimated what their investment is, because the state agencies are committing a significant amount of staff time, not as much project money, but significant staff time, and they're estimating that over a 3-year period, their investment will equal about $2.5 million. So for the state of Massachusetts, let's say roughly $11 million over the course of 3 years, and what that would get us is a first version of the plan, of the Integrated Ocean Management Plan, what's called the Plan for the Plan, which is how to move forward towards the next generation plan. We're required to revisit it at least every 5 years. So significant products and a significant amount of stakeholder investment, but it's not cheap.
Thank you. Thank you both. And I just want to reiterate that during lunch, if you have further questions for them or want to talk in more detail about any of these things, it'll be over on that side of this room, and you can access that. Some quick reminders about the session that will be starting after the break. In about 3 or 4 minutes, we'll start a break. The break lasts half an hour, and at about 10 to 11, I guess it is, we'll ask you to go back to your rooms. I say back to your rooms, although there are some changes. Everyone's going to the same room, except if you were in Westminster 1 yesterday. You've changed rooms today. So if you were in Westminster 1 and had a blue star, your work is cut out for you. You have to find the Fraser room. And this is no small task. The Fraser room is out down the corridor where Westminster rooms are, and you keep going about 3.5 miles. No, it's not that far. Fortunately, you go right past the bar, but please don't stop at the bar. It's only 11 o'clock in the morning. But you walk past the bar, through the lobby, and there will be people there to guide you from that point on. And so we'd ask, if you're going to the Fraser room, that you make sure you start on time. Everybody should be headed to those spaces at 10:02. Remember, we need you to be in those rooms as soon as you can after the break is over so that you can get down to work, because the stakeholder engagement piece is important. In your folder, you have a sheet that asks some questions that your group will be working on, and you might want to take a look at that during the break. After the breakout session, you're going to end at around 12:20 or so, and lunch will start. Lunch will be in here from 12:30 until 1:20. So it's 50 minutes. You don't have a formal presentation, so it's a little more free-formed, and there'll be the opportunity over there to meet with these people if you want to.